Jai Gurudev. Hopefully you have completed revisiting the pages 184, 185 and 186 that we did last week. We will continue with page 187 now. Yeah? In this Udalaka is still contemplating, still thinking about what is the consciousness, what is the mind, what are the senses, who am I. He is on his journey of self-inquiry. So let's read ahead with page 187.
Uddalaka continued to reflect thus. In reality, consciousness cannot be conditioned. It is unlimited and subtler than the subtlest atom, hence beyond the influence of mental conditioning. The mind rests in the ego sense and the reflected consciousness in the senses, and from this there arises an illusion of self-limitation of consciousness. When this is experienced and thought of again and again, the ego sense and the illusion of self-limitation acquire a false validity. But I am consciousness, which is untouched by any of these.
So here he says that consciousness cannot be conditioned. He's talking about the Purusha, the self, the soul, the Atma, which is nothing but a reflection of the Brahman. It cannot be conditioned. Means what? Your mind has got conditioned because of past impressions. It gets conditioned because of the people it comes into contact with. Because of what the parents teach, what the friends teach, what the environment teaches you, what your school teachers teach you. That's how the little mind grows up. It gets conditioned by its environment with its associations. Yes, but the consciousness, the Purusha, the self is ever pure. There is no conditioning for the consciousness because it is unlimited and subtler than the subtlest atom. Hence, it is beyond the influence of mental conditioning. Just like this space here. This space is subtler than the subtlest. I cannot stain this space. I cannot get hold of this space. I cannot touch this space. Just like that, the consciousness is 100 times subtler than this space even. That consciousness, which is subtler than the subtlest, cannot be stained. So, it is beyond mental conditioning. The mind rests in the ego sense. The mind started because of I, no? I am this, or I want to be this. That first I is the cause of this entire samsara. So that mind rests in that ego sense and the reflected consciousness in the senses. This I cannot see. It is the Purusha, the energy of the consciousness that enables this I to see. Correct? So it is actually the reflected consciousness in the sense of sight that enables it to see. Correct? So the mind thinks that it is the I that sees. Yes? Or it is the body that sees. And therefore it starts thinking that I am this body. So it's just a little, a misunderstanding for the mind. थोड़ी सी गलत फहमी हो गई है बस. वो निकालनी है. This misunderstanding of the mind needs to be removed. It thinks that it is a piece of Prakriti and identifies with this piece of Prakriti called body-mind complex. When you go beyond that and recognize you are the consciousness, you realize, oh, it is the power of the consciousness that runs this body. And it is the same power of the consciousness that actually is the crux for the mind to exist. The mind cannot exist without the consciousness. Yeah? The mind rests in the ego sense and the reflected consciousness in the senses. So far clear? And from this there arises the illusion of self-limitation of consciousness. You understood? Just that misunderstanding of identifying with the Prakriti is the self-limitation of the consciousness. When this is experienced and thought of again and again, the ego sense and the illusion of self-limitation acquire a false validity. Basically, this misunderstanding of identifying with this body-mind complex, this misunderstanding will drop away. And how will it drop away? By again and again thinking about it, revisiting this knowledge again and again. That's how this misunderstanding will be dropped away. But I am consciousness which is untouched by any of these. Yeah? Slowly you come to that realization that I am the Purusha, the consciousness which is untouched by this Prakriti. Clear? First paragraph clear? We can go ahead now.
Let the body continue to live in a world brought into being by its ignorant activities, or let it abandon it. I am consciousness unaffected by any of these. Consciousness, being infinite and all-pervading, has no birth nor death, nor is it possessed by anyone. It has nothing to gain by living as a separate entity, since it is all-pervading. Birth and death are mental concepts. They have nothing to do with the self. Only that which entertains notions of the ego sense can be grasped and bound. The self is free from the ego sense and therefore being, beyond being and non-being.
Okay. So here Udalaka is now contemplating further, saying, let the body continue to live in a world brought into being by its ignorant activities, or let it abandon it. Yeah? This body has been brought into being by Maya, by ignorance, by identifying with something, by saying, I want to be air, I want to be fire, I want to be earth. That's how the elements came into existence. From that pool of consciousness, the first I came. This I is ignorance. Yeah? Thinking that I am separate from that pool of consciousness. This first thought itself is ignorance. So it is an ignorant activity that brought this body into being. So whether this body, is abandoned or not, Udalaka is contemplating that I am not bothered about it. I am consciousness, unaffected by any of these. He recognizes he is the Purusha, not the Prakriti. Consciousness, being infinite and all-pervading, has no birth nor death. Yes, birth and death belong only to the Prakriti, not to the Purusha. I am the Purusha, he is saying. Yeah? So, I am beyond birth and death, nor is it possessed by anyone. Yeah? We say, no, this body is mine. It is a sense of possessiveness that I have for this piece of Prakriti. Yeah? But the consciousness, the energy, the formless, infinite energy that you are, yeah? You cannot say, I possess it. You can possess only that which you can perceive with the mind. Yeah? Either I see something, I want to possess it. I hear something, I want to possess it. I touch something, I want to possess it. I taste something, I want to possess it. I smell something, I want to possess it. I can possess that which has a form and that which can be perceived through the five senses. The Purusha or the consciousness is beyond these five senses and cannot be possessed. Yeah? A thought cannot even arise in your head to possess that which is formless. Beautiful, no? It has nothing to gain by living as a separate entity, since it is all pervading. Yeah? It's like space. Space does not say, oh, I the space in Chicago, I'm separate from I the space in Cincinnati. Yeah? The space does not even have such a thought. Yeah? Just like that, the consciousness is all pervading and it has no such thought of wanting to be a separate entity. Only that which entertains notions of the ego sense can be grasped and bound. Yeah? So only when you are lost in this Prakriti, yeah, being in the Prakriti itself has come out of ego, I. Only that which comes out of I can be bound, yeah, can be grasped. But the self is free from the ego sense and therefore it is beyond being and non-being. Yeah. This is so beautiful, no? Beautiful description or beautiful differentiation between Purusha and Prakriti. You can actually make a table. You have Purusha on one side and have Prakriti on the other side, and you can actually write down the differences. So beautifully it is brought out here. Yeah? We'll go ahead now.
The ego sense is vain delusion. The mind is like a mirage, and the objects of the world are inert substances. Who is it that says, I am? The body is an aggregate of flesh, blood, etc. The mind vanishes on inquiry into its nature. Self-limitation of consciousness and such other concepts are insentient, nonsense. What is the ego? The senses exist and are engaged in self-satisfying activity all the time. The substances of the world are the substances of the world. Where is the ego? Nature is nature, and its qualities interact on one another, like the sight and light, hearing and sound, etc. And what is rests in itself. Where is the ego?
Now in this paragraph, he describes about ego. Yeah? The ego sense is vain delusion. The mind is like a mirage, and the objects of the world are inert substances. Basically, he's describing all that falls under Prakriti. Prakriti begins with I, which is ego. Yeah, it is vain and it is a delusion that I am something. That's where the beginning of Prakriti happens. The next step of Prakriti is the subtle body or the mind. And the mind is like a mirage. Yeah? It does not even exist. It's just an illusion. Yeah? And then the objects of the world are the third step in creation. The objects of the world are inert substances. Who is it that says I am? When all this is just a big illusion, yeah, who is it that is saying I am? The body is an aggregate of flesh, blood, etc. The mind vanishes on inquiry into its nature. Yeah? When you start looking at your mind, keep looking at it, look at the thoughts that are coming and going, what happens? After some time the thoughts drop away. Yeah? So the mind vanishes on inquiry into its nature. Self-limitation of consciousness and such other concepts are insentient, means they are nonsense. What is nonsense? Oh, that the Purusha is limited. No, Purusha is not really limited. Yeah, it is this big delusion, this big magic trap, Indrajal, that has been laid, yeah, which makes you think like that the consciousness is limited. This is all nonsense. What is the ego? Yeah? How can something like ego even exist with all this? So repeating that, he says the body is an aggregate of flesh, blood, etc. The mind vanishes on inquiry. Self-limitation of consciousness and such other concepts are nonsense. Where is the ego? Yeah? Where is this I? Where is this ego? The senses exist and are engaged in self-satisfying activity all the time. The substances of the world are the substances of the world. Where is the ego? As in, these senses, the sight, sense of sight only wants to see more. It is the thirst of the mind really. Yeah? The skin only wants to touch, feel more. Yeah? It's never satisfied. Yeah? So the senses are only engaged in self-satisfying activity all the time. And the substances of the world means that which I touch, that which I see, that which I smell. They're just substances of the world. Where is the ego? Nature is nature and its qualities interact on one another like sight and light. So like sense of sight is interacting with light. Yeah, that's how you can see. Yeah, sense of smell interacts with the earth element. Sense of touch interacts with air element. Yeah, just like that. Sense of sound interacts with ether. Yeah. And what is rests in itself? Where is the ego? So beautifully put, na? Yeah. Let's go ahead and complete the last paragraph on this page. Yeah. Hopefully everything is clear for you so far. Yeah.
The self, which is consciousness, exists as the supreme self of all, everywhere, in all bodies, at all times. Who am I? What am I made of? What is my form? Made by whom? What shall I acquire and what shall I reject? There is thus nothing which can be called I and which undergoes being and non-being. When there is no ego sense in truth, how can that ego sense be related and to whom? When thus it is realized that there is no relationship at all, then the false notion of duality vanishes. Thus, whatever there is the one cosmic being, Brahman or the Self. I am that reality. Why do I suffer in delusion? When one alone exists as a pure omnipresent being, how can there even arise something known as the ego sense? There is no substantiality in any substance in truth. The self alone exists. Even if one assumes the substantiality to be real, there is no relationship between that and the self. The senses function as senses, the mind exists as mind, the consciousness is untouched by these. What is the relationship and how does it come into being? Just because they exist side by side, it is not right to assume a relationship. A stone and an iron rod may lie side by side, totally unrelated to each other.
This is so beautiful. The self, which is consciousness, exists as the supreme self of all, everywhere, in all bodies, at all times. Who am I? What am I made of? What is my form? Made by whom? Yeah, he's contemplating all this. That it is the Purusha only that is there in everything, no? Whether it is a tree, an animal, a human, a computer table, or me. It is all that same consciousness which is there in everything. Yeah? If I am that consciousness, yeah, why am I so stuck with this Prakriti? Why am I so lost here? Yeah? He is asking that question to himself. Who am I? What am I made of? Yeah? Really look into this. This is your homework also. Are you on this journey of self-inquiry yet? There is thus nothing which can be called I, and which undergoes being and non-being. Yeah, understand being and non-being? I feel, oh, right now I am in this body and I feel I am. And when I die, or I think when I die, I will not be. Got it? So being and not being. I think like that because I identify with this body. Yeah? Consciousness is beyond this feeling of being or not being. Yeah? So beautiful. There is nothing which can be called I and which undergoes being and non-being. When there is no ego sense in truth, how can that ego sense be related and to whom? Yeah? How can I be related to anybody? Yeah? I only doesn't exist. Yeah? I feel this body is related to that body. Yeah? Because that body is, either the father or mother or friend or husband or wife or child. Yeah? That's how I think. This is the relationship. But that relationship is of that Prakriti to this Prakriti. I am not this Prakriti. That I does not exist only. Yeah, he's going a step ahead. He's not just saying I am not the body. He's saying I does not exist. There is no I in the first place. And if there is no I, where is the question of being or not being? Yeah? Yeah? Where is the question of this I being related at all when I only doesn't exist? What are relationships? They do not exist. When thus it is realized that there is no relationship at all, then the false notion of duality vanishes. I and you is duality. Yeah? I am related to you. This duality exists because I believe in a relationship existing. But the moment this idea of relationship drops off, duality also drops off. Thus, whatever there is the one cosmic being or Brahman. Yeah? I am that reality. Why do I suffer in delusion? Yeah? Why am I lost in this Maya that I am this body? When one alone exists as the pure omnipresent being, how can there even arise something known as the ego sense? Yeah, when it is all Purusha, yeah, where is the question of I? How can the space in this room say I am different from the space in that room? Yeah, it is all omnipresent, it is everywhere, it is all pervading, it is just one. There is no two. So where is the question of I? Where is the question of you? Duality drops off. There is no substantiality in any substance in truth. The self alone exists. Even if one assumes the substantiality to be real, there is no relationship between that and the self. Yeah? Even if you think that this world of people and things and objects around you is real, yeah, then also there is no relationship of that with the consciousness or the self. Yeah? There is no relationship between that and the self. The senses function as senses. The mind exists as mind. The consciousness is untouched by these. What is the relationship and how does it come into being? Yeah? Just because this object in the world, whatever it is, a person or a thing, lies next to the Purusha or the consciousness does not mean that it is related to that. And he gave you an example, an analogy. Just because a stone is lying next to an iron rod side by side, it is totally unrelated. Just like that. The Purusha or the self or the consciousness is unrelated to anything. Yeah? Really profound page, no? 187. Beautiful. Let's move on to page 188 now. Yeah.
Uddalaka continued to reflect. It is only when this false ego sense has arisen that the perverse notions, this is mine and that is his, arise. And when it is seen that all these are tricks of the false ego sense, these unreal notions cease to be. There is in truth naught else but the self. Hence I realize that all this is the one cosmic being or Brahman. The delusion known as the ego sense is like the blueness of the sky. It is better not to entertain that notion once again, but to abandon it. After having abandoned the very root of ego sense, I rest in the self, which is of the nature of peace. The ego sense is the source of endless sorrow, suffering, and evil action. Life ends in death. Death leads to birth. And what is disrupted by its own end. Such notions entertained by the ego sense lead to great sorrow. The anxiety caused by thoughts like, I have got this now, I shall get that too, burns the ignorant. Such notions as, this is, and that is not, cause restlessness in the egotist. But if the ego sense ceases to be, then the illusory world appearance does not germinate again, and all cravings come to an end.
Okay. Yeah, so he is going further and talking about the ego sense. Yeah, let's look at that. It is only when this false ego sense has arisen that the perverse notions, this is mine and this is his, arise. So ego leads to the strong belief, incorrect belief of relationship. Yeah? And when I become very strong in that incorrect belief of relationship, I think this is mine. Then possessiveness happens. Yeah? So first is I, the ego, then is the illusion of relationship, and then comes possessiveness. Yeah? Mine and his comes after the ego. And when it is seen that all these tricks of the false, when these are all just tricks of the false ego sense, these unreal notions cease to be. Yeah. When you see that, oh, it is just a mirage in the desert, you stop running after the water, no? Yeah, you realize, oh no, it is just the sand which is shining because of the strong sunlight in the distance. It looks like water, but it is not really water. When you wake up to this, when you realize it, then you are not feverish about running to that water, correct? Exactly in the same way, when you see that all these are just tricks of the false ego sense, these unreal notions cease to be. Now the mirage does not cease to be, the mirage is there, but the notion in my head that that is water and that will quench my thirst, that ceases to be. So you see what I'm saying? This world of people, situations and things and all the drama that you see outside will still occur. Because of the sanchita karma of this body, all the sanchita will come my way. But I will not be perturbed by it. Yes? You get that? That is the difference here. There is in truth not else but the self. Hence, I realize that all this is the one cosmic being or Brahman. Yes, everything is just the self. The delusion known as the ego sense is like the blueness of the sky. It is better not to entertain that notion once again, but to abandon it. Yeah, I start thinking, I am something, I am like this, you should listen to me, I am great, I, this is mine. Yeah, then ego sense leads to relationships, relationships leads to possessiveness, possessiveness leads to all drama in your life. Yeah, you have to recognize the root cause. This I itself has no foundation. It does not exist. Yeah, because first of all, I am not this piece of Prakriti which I call I. Yeah, and how can you call that consciousness or that Purusha I, because it is like this space. Yeah, so you can't call the Prakriti I, you can't call the Purusha I. Where does I even exist? When I or the ego sense does not exist, that which ego gives birth to, relationships and possessiveness and mine, this mineness is all a delusion. All this is just a magic trick. It is like the blueness of the sky. Why does he say blueness of the sky? You know the sky is not really blue, no? Yeah. It is just the refraction of the light that gives that apparent illusion that it is blue in color. Yeah. Just like that. This is an apparent illusion that I exist, I am. There is nothing like I in the first place. Take this as your homework for the week. Every time you say I, become very aware of what you are saying. Yeah. And recognize I am using the word I right now for the sake of convenience. Yes, for the sake of dialogue. Yeah, so that the other person understands I am referring to this piece of Prakriti here. That's it. But actually, I does not exist. I am not the body, I am not the mind. And the Purusha is so all-pervading that you cannot address it as I. Now, one interesting thing is that your piece of flesh and blood and bones had to be given a name by your parents. How would they distinguish you from your brother or sister? They had to give you a name, so they gave you a name. Yeah, for example, John. Yeah, because they had to differentiate between John and Chris. Yeah, a name is given to the piece of Prakriti to help it, to help differentiate between different pieces of Prakriti, just for the sake of convenience. Now, it will be very awkward if that piece of Prakriti called John addresses himself as John. So he had to also give a name to himself. And the name that everybody decided to give to themselves was I. I is the name of this piece of Prakriti when I am addressing it, and Ekta is the name of the same piece of Prakriti when you are addressing it. That's it. As simple as that. Neither is the body yours, neither is the name of your body called John or Chris or Ekta yours, neither is the name I that you have given to your body yours. Do you see what I'm saying? I does not exist. Yeah. Whenever you're talking to yourself, take this down as a third homework. Whenever you're talking to yourself, address yourself in the third person. Yeah? Don't call yourself I. Yeah? Take your name, Ekta, and say whatever you have to say, whatever you are thinking, whatever you have to do. Yes? Experiment with this for some time. Yeah? You will recognize I does not exist. Yeah. After having abandoned the very root of the ego sense, I rest in the self, which is the nature of peace. The ego sense is the source of endless sorrow, suffering, and evil action. This you already know. Yeah, I do not have to specify here how your I leads to possessiveness and jealousy and greed. It is all because of that relationship that comes up, that false relationship. Yeah, I am this and this is related to me, this is mine and this is not mine, and he is mine and she is not mine, and all the drama around that mineness. Yes, jealousy comes from that, greed comes from that, hatred comes from that, love comes from that, passion comes from that. Yeah. The root cause of all suffering is I, the ego sense. Life ends in death, and death leads to birth. And what is disrupted by its own end? Such notions, entertained by the ego sense, lead to great sorrow. Yeah? So drop this identification with the body. Very easily you will be able to drop the identification with death or life. None of these exist. There is a continuity. It is a complete continuous curve. It is just the imagination in this continuous curve which makes you feel there is a beginning and an end, and again a beginning and an end. Actually, there is no beginning, no end. It is one continuous curve. Yeah. Drop the identification with the piece of Prakriti. The anxiety caused by thoughts like I have got this now, I shall get that too, burns the ignorant. Such notions as this is and this is not cause restlessness in the egotist. But if the ego sense ceases to be, then the illusory world appearance does not germinate again, and all cravings come to an end. Means what? Only when I say I, then I say I like, and I say I don't like. Then I say this should be, this should not be. When I have dropped the I itself, how can should be and should not be even arise? How can this is mine and this is not mine even arise? Yeah, because the I itself will drop off. That is the true nature of peace. Just being. No ego sense, no I. Yeah? That is why Guruji gives you that homework, no? He gave it to you in Ashtavakra also. Live as if you do not exist. Just like a crystal. Yeah? The crystal reflects all the colors around it. Yeah? It reflects whatever is around it as if it does not exist. Yeah? Live like that. Live as if you do not exist. No, I am not. I like, I dislike. This should be, this should not be. This is right, this is wrong. Drop all this. Actually drop the I. The moment you drop the I, all these will drop. Yes. Once this drops, the world appearance does not germinate again and all cravings come to an end. We'll go ahead now.
This universe has surely come into being without any valid cause for its creation. How can one accept the truth of a creation which had no cause or purpose? From time immemorial, all these bodies have been inherent in the cosmic being, even as pots are forever inherent in clay. Even as oceans exist in the past, present, and future as ocean, and the same water temporarily assumes the form of a wave, all this is forever the cosmic being at all times. It is only a fool who entertains a feeling, this I am, in relation to that temporary appearance known as the body, etc. In the same way, the mind was consciousness in the beginning and will be consciousness again in the end, after its nature and function as mind have ceased. Why then is it called differently in the middle now? All these phenomena seem to have a transient reality, like dream experiences, visions in a state of delirium, hallucinations of a drunkard, optical illusions, psychosomatic illness, emotional disturbances, and psychotic states. But, O mind, you have conferred a permanent reality upon them, even as a lover suffers from the very imagination of his beloved's separation. But of course, this is not your fault. It is my fault that I still cling to the notion that you, my mind, are a real entity. When I realize that all these are illusory appearances, then you will become no mind, and all the memories of self experiences, etc., will come to an end. When consciousness realizes itself and abandons its self-limiting mental conditioning, the mind is freed from its coloring and rests in its essential nature, which is consciousness. When the mind, gathering to itself all its limbs, offers itself into the fire of pure consciousness, it is purified and attains immortality.
Yeah. So he says this universe has surely come into being without any valid cause for its creation. Then how can one accept the truth of a creation which has no cause, no purpose? Yeah? You keep asking, no, what is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of this creation? It has no purpose. Yeah? How can you accept that this creation is really true? What is he trying to say here? When you are dreaming, yeah, your dream really is baseless. It has no foundation. It is not real. Yeah. That is why you don't ask, oh, what is the purpose of me to dream like this? Yeah, you just let go of the dream in the morning. You don't care about it. Yes. You don't go into the depth of each dream that you see. Yeah. And ask, what is the purpose of this dream? You let go. Yeah. Because you know it's not real. Exactly the same thing he's saying here. This creation is therefore not real because it has no purpose. Yeah? It has no cause or purpose. From time immemorial, all these bodies have been inherent in the cosmic being. Yeah? So in the Brahman, all these prakritis have been coming up. Just like pots are forever inherent in clay. Yeah? Whether it is the clay is just a big ball of clay or whether it is in the form of a pot. It doesn't matter. It is all just clay. Yeah? Even when it is just a ball of clay, the pot is inherent in it. Like a big piece of magnificent marble, white marble. A big rock of white color marble. Yeah? The beautiful statue is actually already inherent in it. Yeah? Recognize that. That is what he's talking about. All these bodies are inherent in this Brahman, in this consciousness. Just like ocean exists in the past, in the present and future as ocean. And the same water temporarily assumes the form of a wave. Yeah? That wave in the past also was ocean, is also ocean and will be also ocean. Just for a little while it stands up and says, I am this huge dangerous wave that can kill you. Yeah? But after some time it is the same ocean. All this is forever, the cosmic being at all times. Only a fool entertains a feeling, I am this, in relation to the temporary appearance known as this body, this piece of Prakriti. Clear? In the same way, the mind was consciousness in the beginning and will be consciousness again in the end. So now in the middle, why are we calling it the mind? Yeah? Just like the wave in the beginning was the ocean and the end was the ocean. So why are you calling it the wave in the middle? It is still the ocean. Just like that, drop calling it the mind. It is the consciousness. Yeah? Consciousness is all there is. Nothing else really exists. All these phenomena seem to have a transient reality, like dream experiences, visions in a state of delirium, hallucinations of a drunkard, optical illusions, psychosomatic illness, emotional disturbance and psychotic states. Yeah? On all these you will just have hallucinations or a dream-like state, yeah, where nothing is real. Exactly that is what the creation is. Exactly what your so-called reality of people, situations and things is, he says. It is nothing but a hallucination, a dream-like state or a psychosomatic illness. But O mind, you have conferred a permanent reality upon them, even as a lover suffers from the very imagination of his beloved's separation. Yeah? He's telling his mind that you are the one that has started thinking all this is real. Yeah? This is all transient, all temporary. But of course, that is not your fault. He's telling your mind it's not your fault. It is my fault that I still cling onto the notion that you, my mind, are a reality. Yeah? The mind does not exist. When I realize that all these illusory appearances are just transient, they are illusory, they do not exist, then what will happen? The mind will become no mind. And all memories of the sense experiences which I am carrying, which is karma, all that will come to an end. When consciousness realizes itself and abandons its self-limiting mental conditioning, the mind is freed from its coloring. and it rests in its essential nature. So you will be free from the coloring of this people, situations and things. Yeah, the self-limiting mental conditioning will be freed when the consciousness realizes itself. It drops this false understanding that this world is real. It drops this false understanding that even this mind is real. Yeah. When the mind, gathering to itself all its limbs, offers itself into the fire of pure consciousness, it is purified and attains immortality. Yeah. So you start with moving from mind to no mind. Yeah. Burn the mind in the fire of the consciousness. Live as if you do not exist. Throughout this week, practice. Speak sentences where I is not required, but if you have to say I, then know that you're just saying it for the sake of convenience. You do not identify with this piece of Prakriti or the mind that is sticking onto this piece of Prakriti. That is also part of Prakriti. Clear? And I will see you next week. Jai Gurudev.